The last speaker we have he's an author of one of my favorite books. So if you've read the book called The Comfort Crisis, please raise your hand. Okay. If you have not, do it. Simple as that. It's one of my favorite books I've read in the last few years. I've read it twice now. My mom's read it twice. I've turned a number of people onto it. It's a beautifully written book by an amazing man, and I've been wanting him to come and share with us for a few years now. Thankfully, in his extremely busy schedule, he's made time to donate to us and flew all the way here from Vegas. He's been a writer for multiple magazines, multiple authors, been on the Rogan podcast a time or two. He's extremely sought after and one of the most interesting people that I've met in a long time, Mr. Michael Easter.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Well, Bert is my part-time PR guy, I like to say. Who in here read the book after they heard it through Bert somehow? There you go, we got a few. All right. Is this working yet? There we go. All right, I'm going to talk to you about the power of leaving your comfort zone. There we go. So, a few years ago, I found myself here. This is a runway in Kotzebue, Alaska. I'm standing there, I'm looking at this plane. Now, Kotzebue is about 20 miles above the Arctic Circle. And as I'm looking at this plane, there's this sleet blowing into my face. The wind is picking up, and I'm preparing myself to get inside this plane here. This is a 1946 PA-12. This particular plane has been crashed and rebuilt twice in its life cycle. And I hate flying. But I get in this thing anyway. Okay, so when I get in, the pilot is sitting in between my legs because this thing is about the size of a Snickers bar. And we're like this insane Alaskan bobsled team, and he fires up the engine of this thing, and it's like a weed whacker. You know. And he takes off. And we fly this thing. I think we might have missed a... Okay. We fly this thing 100 miles out into the middle of the Arctic. Okay, and he lands, gets out, he chucks my stuff on the tundra, and he says, all right, see you in about a month. I go, okay. So I'm out in this place called the Baird Mountain Range with two other guys. We're going to be there for more than a month. Having technical problems, that's not my strong suit. We can just stop there, yeah. So we're in a place called the Baird Mountains. Now, this is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's up above the Arctic Circle. It's also one of the most extreme and remote places on Earth. So whiteout storms can hit at any minute. There's grizzlies everywhere. There's raging glacial rivers. And you are more alone than you will ever be. So it's going to be a very uncomfortable month. But that was the entire point of me going up there, was to get uncomfortable. So let me tell you how I got there. We'll see if this video kicks back on again. Nope, here we go. All right, so I'm giving you the long version of how I got up there. So 1985, my dad, who you can see here, you might see a little bit of a resemblance, he's in a drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility. And this rehab, they had given my mom this book that he was supposed to be reading in his rehab. So the deal was basically, all right, lady, here's this book. He's going to be reading it. Read it so you know what he's going through. That way, when he comes back into your life, you'll kind of have a sense of what's going on, and you can help him. So she's like, okay, I'll read the book. So one night, she's taking a bath. She's drinking a gin and tonic. She starts reading the book. She gets a few pages in. She realizes, oh, everything in this book, it also applies to me. So she realizes that she has a problem as well. So she gets sober while my dad's in rehab. He gets out. They're nice and happy and sober for a while. Things aren't chaotic. My dad manages to stay sober for about 3 weeks, which is just long enough to get my mom pregnant. Take off for good. So I get raised by a single mom. Does anyone know what percentage of single mothers in the U.S. live in what the government calls extreme poverty. That is $200 a week. Any guesses? Not 2%. A little higher than that. Close. Someone say 40? You're very close. It's 50%. So you basically have a coin flip's chance, if you are a single mother in the US, of living in extreme poverty. Now, the thing about my mom, though, is that she's a real good coin flipper, okay? She worked her butt off. So she decided that she was going to be an independent sales rep for women's clothes. And I watched her work really hard. She drove more miles, made more sales calls, just did more than anyone else in the industry. And our lives got pretty good. I'm not saying we were rich, but I am saying that things were pretty good. And by the time that I am in my 20s, when I was younger, it always occurred to me, given your parents' history with alcohol, you probably should never drink. Now, I should have listened to myself because by the time I was 20, my life looked pretty good on paper, I would say. But internally, I was a total mess, complete mess, and it all tracked back to my drinking. So a good sign that you have a drinking problem is that all of your problems are caused by your drinking. And that was me. And I tried to quit hundreds of different ways. I was always trying to find the easy way out, though. It's like, what sort of cockeyed scheme can I come up with so that I'm able to drink, but not so much that I do crazy things that destroy my life? Never worked. One morning I woke up and I just could very clearly see that if I continued that behavior, I was gonna die early. Like, no question in my mind. So there's this, if you're someone like me, your drinking leads you to hospitals, to jails, or to funeral homes. And I'd hit 2 out of the 3. And I realized that if I was gonna change anything, it wasn't gonna be easy. Now, I can continue doing the easy thing, which was to continue drinking. Be easy in the short term and it would destroy me in the long term. Or I could decide that I was gonna do the hard thing. I could embrace discomfort and try to get sober. It's like, oh, this is gonna be really hard. And I stepped into that fire, and by doing that, my life improved across the board. Like, once I got sober, things just immediately got better. Full stop. Things you could measure, things you could not measure. My bank account, bigger number in it. Scale weight, smaller number. Fitness numbers, higher numbers. But more importantly was how I felt about myself. I felt calm. I finally felt good about myself. Things started moving in the right direction. So I'm working at Men's Health magazine at the time, and it was interesting because I could also observe that literally everything that I would write about in this magazine, you had to go through discomfort in order to get whatever benefit it was. If you want to improve your health, you got to exercise. Exercise is uncomfortable. If you want to lose weight, you might have to eat less. You're going to be hungry. It's uncomfortable. If you want to improve your mental health, you might have to ask yourself some hard questions and have some hard conversations. But on the other side of that is growth. Now, at Men's Health, I end up getting assigned to do this story on a guy named Donnie Vincent. Does anyone know who Donnie Vincent is? A few people. So he's this guy, he's a backcountry bow hunter and filmmaker. And he goes into these remote, super wild areas for months at a time, and he makes these hunting films. They're a lot like Planet Earth, but they happen to have hunting. Like, they're very beautiful films, really. And he's changing the face of hunting and how it's conducted and how people think about it. So I go do a story on him, and this entails me going off the grid with him for about a week. We're up in the mountain ranges of Nevada, and we're hunting. And let me tell you, it was uncomfortable the entire time. I was freezing cold. We're up in these 10,000-foot ridges. I'm freezing cold. I am bored out of my mind, too. For people who don't hunt, hunting's actually very boring, come to find out. I'm hungry because we have to hike in all our food. We didn't want to bring in too much. On and on and on. But when I get back home, I feel better. I'm like, man, I feel like I really did something hard and interesting. I feel like kind of purified. And I could also see that my life at home was so much more comfortable than the life I lived out there. Now, humans evolved in environments that were uncomfortable in every single way. Today, we live in a world where the things that most impact your experience on Earth, day to day, they're all new, all made within the last 100 years, and they're all designed to make your life more comfortable in some way. Think about your day this morning. Every single thing new and made your life easier. Now, this is a good thing. This is progress, but it also comes with downsides. So after this story comes out, and that's the story, Donnie and I keep in touch. We become buddies, we text, and he calls me one day, and he's got this Minnesota accent type thing. He's like, "Hey, Michael, I'm going up to the Arctic for more than a month. Do you want to come along?" Now, I'm thinking to myself, not only no, but like hell no. But he starts in on this sales pitch. And he's telling me how it's going to be the most epic adventure a human being could ever go on. And just on and on and on. We're going to see grizzlies and wolverines. And I start thinking about that observation that I had made about discomfort and its benefits. So I think, all right, well, this could be a way to test my theory, like quite epically. So I say, yeah, I'll do it. So I sign on, start training, buy a bunch of gear. Now at that moment, slide misfired again, my comfort zone is this blue dot, and the Arctic is going to throw me well out of it. Like, I'm just going to be hurled into a world that I am not necessarily prepared for. It's going to be a hard month. But by going through that, when I got home, my comfort zone had expanded. So I obviously survived the month, right? But I was fitter and healthier than I'd ever been, which isn't surprising. But I think what was most interesting is that my perspective on life and living it and how lucky we are today, it had totally shifted. Nothing ruffled me. That was my wife's comment. It's like, what do you think is different about me? She's like, you just don't get ruffled. And I was so appreciative of all the amazing things we have in life that we often take for granted. And I wanted to know what was up with that. Like, what is it about getting out of your comfort zone that can improve your life? So I'm a journalist. My job is to ask these big questions and then chase down the answers wherever they'll take me. So I started traveling. I traveled over 30,000 miles around the world. I went into Bhutan. I went to genetic labs in Iceland. Met with people all over. And these people and places, they all sort of showed me in their own unique way the power of leaving your comfort zone. I'm taking on challenges. And now the upside to all of you is that you don't have to go all the way up to the Arctic for a month to get some of the benefits that I learned along the way. But I want to share 4 of them with you. So these are 4 things that I think apply not only to this community, but really any human living in the developed world right now. So we're going to go over them. So number 1, find your Misogi. So there's a Japanese myth, and it is called the Misogi myth. And it centers on this guy. And his name is Izanagi. Now, Izanagi is a god in the Shinto faith. His wife is a goddess in the Shinto faith. Their kids are all gods. They have all kinds of money, all kinds of power. So life is great for this guy, Izanagi. And then one day, his wife ends up dying. When this happens, he decides that he can't live without her. Like, he's done. What he decides he's going to do is he's going to go into the underworld, which is where all Shinto gods go after they die. And he is going to rescue his wife. So he goes down into this cavern of hell. This crazy descent to this very challenging world. He's looking for his wife. And the sort of depressing, spoiler alert, part of this story is that when he finds his wife, she's become a zombie. Like, she's no longer. But he also realizes that if he doesn't make it out of here, this hellish landscape, like immediately, he's also going to die. And he's got kids in the normal world. So he has to make this insane escape up to the mainland. And it's one of the hardest things a human being has ever done. He's going through all these caverns, he's got these demons grabbing at him, these zombies grabbing at him. And along the way, he faces all these moments where he thinks he's reached his edge. It's like, this is my edge. I can't go any further. I am not capable of going further. But somehow he just keeps putting one foot in front of the other. One foot in front of the other. And by crossing and recrossing that edge he thinks he has, he finally makes it out of the cavern. And this teaches him something about himself. And that's that he undersold his potential, that he was capable of more than he thought he could do. And this changes the guy forever. He becomes a better God, he becomes a better father, he becomes a better leader. So I told you that story to ask you this. When is the last time you were truly challenged? I mean physically, mentally, emotionally, all at once. Think about that for a minute. So over our species, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, it was absolutely essential for our survival as human beings to do hard things all the time. This could be from big hunts. This could be from moving from summering to wintering grounds. This could be from tigers lurking in the bushes. And each time we would encounter one of these challenges, we would be thrust out of our comfort zone. And by going out onto those edges, we would learn something about ourselves, and our edges would in turn expand. We would become better humans. We would become more capable. But if you think about modern life today, you can survive without really being challenged. You'll have water, you'll have food, you have a roof over your head. And this is good. But at the same time, if you think about human potential as this really big circle, kind of around us all, it's easy to live in this space right here because life never thrusts us out onto the edges. So along this journey I took reporting this book, I learned about this idea of misogi. A misogi is a tip of the hat to Izanagi, and it is a once a year insane challenge that we take on for the sake of growth in nature. And there are two rules to misogi. Rule 1, make it really hard. Rule 2, don't die. Now, rule 1, this is defined by saying we should have a 50-50 shot at whatever you decide to take on for your misogi task. True 50-50 shot. Because when you think about how we take on challenges today, we usually know we're going to complete them. Think about how people run marathons. They don't say, I don't know if I'm going to finish the marathon. They say, I don't know if I'm going to finish the marathon in 4 hours, or whatever some arbitrary time is, right? And then rule 2, that's pretty self-explanatory. Please be safe, take water, bring a cell phone. So the guy that I learned about misogis from, his name is Marcus Elliott, and he's a sports physiologist. Probably a lot of you have heard about him. And he does a lot of work with numbers, data, and figures, and training and injury prevention. But he also realizes that what really affects athletes and just the general population is what's upstairs. It's like some people have a gear where it's at the very end of the game, you're giving that person the ball. And so how do you get to that? He gets to it with misogi. So he will take people out to the wilderness and they'll take on one super hard task once a year following those guidelines. So this is a photo of a misogi these guys did where they carried an 85-pound boulder underwater for, I believe it was 5 miles underneath the Santa Barbara Channel. They've also done simpler ones where you just pick a mountain that you can see in the distance and you try and run up it in a single day. Now the point of this is that in an appropriately difficult misogi, that 50-50 shot, you are inevitably going to hit a moment where you're like Izanagi. Where you go, I am done. Like, I can't finish this. I'm going home. tapping out. But if you can keep going past that edge you thought you had, then you get another moment. And that's where you can look back and say, wait a minute, I thought my edge was back there, but I'm past it. So I've sold myself short there. And then this raises the more important question, which is, where else in my life am I selling myself short? And that changes you. That realization, it absolutely changes you. Now, I've talked about Misogis. You guys are a sort of rare crowd. But I've talked about Misogis with groups of lawyers, accountants, talked about it with some safety professionals one time. And the initial thought and reaction that people give this idea is, it's kind of interesting. It's like vaguely interesting. It's also kind of weird. Like, what's up with the rock underwater? And I thought the same thing too, at first. But I'm a journalist. I ask questions. I do research. We used to call these rites of passage. So when we had a person who was at point A in their life, and we needed to get them to point B, this is the point where they are a better contributor, they're more capable, they're more confident, they can do more, they can affect things. What would we do? We'd send them out into nature to do something hard, often with minimal safety nets. So the Maasai, for example, they would send young warriors on a lion hunt. You had Native American tribes would send young people out into the wilderness for an extended period of time, because along the way they would be like Izanagi. You have those moments of doubt, but you figure out your stuff. And once you figure that out, you can come back into your normal life and you're better for it. You're at that point B. And this is a very, very classic myth throughout humanity. So there's this guy whose name is Joseph Campbell, and he studied thousands and thousands of years of mythology, like all the stories that different societies around the world tell. And he noticed that they all had the same basic structure. So at the start of every story, things are good in the main character's life. And then they have a problem. This problem is like a call to adventure. Problem inserts itself in their life. Right after that, they immediately move on to, what have I done? Should never give me a clicker, guys. There we go. Immediately after that, they move on to this state, which is called refusal. This is where you go, I don't want to deal with this problem. Like, I'm just going to ignore it. Screw this problem. I'm not doing what I need to do. Like, I'm just going to forget it. But if you accept the problem, you decide that you're going to solve it, you're going to figure this thing out, you move into this zone, this unknown. Because problems are about uncertainties. Something has gone wrong, we don't know how it's going to turn out, and we got to figure it out. And we struggle down there. So this is a hard part, right? As you're trying to figure out a problem, it's difficult, it's challenging. You have times where you don't necessarily believe in yourself. But by going through that, you eventually come out the other side. And you're a new person. You're literally a new person. Because in this zone, which we can call sort of the struggle zone, you've learned all these things about yourself. You've learned things about how to behave in the future. And your behavior changes forever. You're literally new. And then what happens is that your life is good for a while, and then another problem comes along. This is the cycle of life. This is how humans learn and grow. But here's the thing. You can stay in this refusal zone. And I guarantee that everyone in this room, in some part of their life, is in this refusal zone. You don't grow from that. You got to be willing to enter that underworld, because you're going to come out on the other side a better person. So when we think about being a new person, I love this quote from Shunryu Suzuki, who's a Zen master. He said, when you do something, you should do it completely. Like a good bonfire, you should burn yourself completely. If you do not burn yourself completely, a trace of yourself will be left in what you do. It's one of the reasons we do hard things. We choose to do hard things because it changes us. And the more you're willing to go into that, the better off you're going to be. And there's actually modern science backing this up. So there's this guy at the University of Buffalo, Mark Siri, and he's done a lot of research, and he's found that basically, on one hand, people who have problem after problem after problem, like seriously traumatic stuff happen in their life, they have poor rates of mental health. But on the flip side, which is surprising, people who have no problems or ignore their problems, they have equally poor rates of mental health. It is the people who frame their problems as opportunities for growth and are willing to accept them and learn from them, those people have the best mental health. This is a long way of saying, view problems as opportunities for growth, and sometimes you have to seek out epic problems, like a Misogi. Okay, next lesson I learned is to embrace boredom. So sometimes on this trip, when I talk about going to the Arctic for more than a month, people think that it was just like this extreme, crazy thing, 24/7, like that, you're always caught in insane blizzards and wrestling grizzly bears and all those sorts of things. We definitely had some sketchy moments. Here's one of them. We had hiked up a mountain, and it was a decent day, but the weather shifted very quickly, and we got pinned down on this ridge, and here is what happened.
Very steep, very slippery, zero room for error, very Christmassy, beautiful. You guys are doing a great job. No room for falling here. It's 5,000 feet down.
So that moment was really interesting for me, because I live a pretty comfortable life before that. I'd never been put in a position where it required extreme focus. Life becomes very crisp, right? Extreme focus of where to put your feet, every single step. Highly stressful, yet very focused. Now, on the other hand, though, the reality is like I said, hunting is very boring. So we'd sit on these hills for hours and hours and hours, waiting for caribou to come through. So we were hunting caribou, and these caribou were not coming through. I didn't have a book. I didn't have my cell phone. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have podcasts. I didn't have TV. So all of a sudden, I find myself bored again. So here's what we did to deal with our boredom.
Due to lack of additives, this product made clumps simply massage the bag to break up the contents before use. But yeah, that's it. Naturally delicious, all 4 MCTs, no artificial flavors, no highly refined sugar, no refrigeration needed. Add an energy boost to your coffee, tea, smoothies, and food. Harness the benefits of coconut, Aquaman.
So we read the labels on our food we packed up. Because of this, I can also tell you that a Cliff Bar has 250 calories. It's got 9 grams of protein, 6 grams of fat, 49 carbs. When that got dull, we read the tags on our gear. My jacket is coated in something called Dermazac. Sounds like acne medication, repels the rain. When that got dull, came up with my Christmas shopping list for the next 7 years. When that got dull, I wrote some of the book. Now, I told you all that to basically tell you this. This was very different than how I would have dealt with boredom were I at home in my normal life. The average person today in the US, they spend more than 12 hours a day engaged with digital media. That's from cell phones, that's from TVs, that's from iPads, that's from video games, that's from podcasts, on and on and on. So I don't play a game. I want everyone to stand up. Stand up and take out your cell phone. And if you please can, go to your screen time. Go to your screen time. And then click the tab that says weekly I don't know how it works on Android, but on Apple, you win. You can sit down. Yeah. So click the weekly tab so we know your average screen time for the week. All right. Everyone have something close to that? All right. Sit down if you have less than 2 hours. Sit down if you have less than 3 hours. Sit down if you have less than 4 hours. Sit down if you have less than 5 daily hours. So if you have an Android, sometimes it does the whole week. We're looking for your average daily. Sit down if you have less than 6 average daily hours. Sit down if you have less than 7. Sit down if you have less than 8. Sit down if you have less than 9. We got a duel. Sit down if you have less than 9.5. 10. Yeah. All right. You email me, I'll send you a signed copy of my book. You already have one. I'll sign it. Yeah. Let's give him a round of applause for going through that. So, to understand why boredom can actually be a good thing, you have to understand why humans get bored in the first place. Like what is boredom? So boredom is an evolutionary discomfort that basically tells us whatever you are doing with your time, the return on your time invested has worn thin. So I want you to imagine it's 1,000,000 years ago. We're all sitting on a hill hunting. We need food, or else we're going to starve. But no animals are coming through. Boredom would kick on, and it would basically tell us, go do something else. Now back then, that something else was often productive. So in our case, we'd go pick berries, we'd pick some potatoes, etc. It would improve our lives. But today, when we feel the discomfort of boredom, we have an easy, effortless escape from it. It's right there in our pocket. Right? So we can kill boredom immediately. It turns out that going through boredom actually has some upsides. So there's research that shows that it decreases stress and anxiety. There's also research that says that it increases productivity and creativity. And now those studies that came from are hilarious. They'll get one group of people and they'll put them in a room and they'll say, hey, we'll be back in 15 minutes. The people pull out their phones. They're on their phones the whole time. They take another group and they bore the hell out of these people for 15 minutes. Then they give them a creativity test. The bored group, every single time, comes up with more answers, and the answers are deemed more creative on a creativity test. And finally, more presence and focus. One of my favorite quotes of all time comes from this guy, William James, and he's basically considered the father of American psychology. And he said, at the end of your life is a culmination of what you paid attention to. And now we pay attention to 12 hours a day of digital media. Your attention is your most important resource. Pay attention to it. Pay attention. All right, lesson 3. So I'm up there hunting. I wasn't necessarily sure if I wanted to hunt at first. I had planned on not hunting. The guy I'm with, Donnie, he says, I think you'll understand why we go all the way up there and do the things we do if you were to hunt. So I say, okay, maybe, dude. I'll think about it. But I buy a tag, and I end up carrying the rifle around the whole trip. But it's still a maybe for me. Now, I had always eaten meat, but I didn't necessarily want to kill it myself, Didn't necessarily know if I wanted to cross that barrier, that emotional barrier. So it was a maybe. Now, for couple weeks, we really didn't see anything, so I thought like I wasn't gonna have to make this decision anyway. I'm like, yeah, well, we suck at hunting, so I don't even have to make this choice. But about 2 weeks in, we get into a spot where, long story short, we realized that if this herd of caribou continued walking the path they were gonna cross a knoll. And if we got on the other side of the knoll, we'd be in a good position. So we go across the knoll, come in along the tundra, army crawl in, and still then I'm going, I don't have to do this. And we're looking at this knoll, and finally we see these big pair of antlers come up over the knoll. There's one pair, it's 2 pairs, 3 pairs. It's like 30 caribou in this herd. They start walking down just like we had anticipated. And I'm looking down the scope going, you could just hand the rifle over to Donnie if you wanted to. But then I noticed that there's this one pair of antlers that kind of has this hitch. Does this kind of weird thing. It's doing this weird thing that the others aren't. And it turns out it's this really old bull who'd been injured on its back leg. So it probably wasn't going to live that much longer. For whatever reason, thought it felt right. Felt okay. So I pulled the trigger. Now, right when I pulled the trigger, my initial reaction was, what have you done? This is the greatest mistake you've ever made in your life. We walk over to the animal, and still then, I'm a mess. I'm a total mess. I'm like, you can never come back from this. We start breaking the animal down because we're going to take every legal part of it that we can. And in that moment, I started to realize, oh, this is meat. And it occurred to me, you eat meat like every single day, dude, and you've never felt one iota of emotion for those animals. And here you are, a mess about this. And what it did is it made me not only thankful for that animal, but for every single animal. And it also made me greatly appreciate the life cycle. The fact that for one creature to live on, another has to die. And the next logical jump in that is, wait a minute, I'm not left out of that, am I? So I start thinking about death. Yeah, it's a little morbid, but I start thinking about death. And let me tell you, that is the most uncomfortable thing that you can think about. Full stop. But what was strange is that after going through that, my behavior changed. I started making decisions that were more long plays. I had more stress tolerance. I didn't pop off in traffic. I was just a better human. Because I realized that the ride was going to end. So I thought, all right, well, let's maybe try and ride this a little better. Now, I wanted to know if that's a thing. And this takes me to the country of Bhutan. So Bhutan, super small country, very underdeveloped. It's about 160 out of 180 on the development rankings. There's not a stoplight in this country. There's not a McDonald's, there's not a Starbucks, there's none of that stuff. But it consistently ranks among the 20 happiest countries on Earth. And one of the reasons for that, researchers think, is that they have a different relationship with death than we do. So death is woven into the culture in Bhutan. People in Bhutan are told to think about their death once a day. There's reminders of death everywhere. So after a person dies in Bhutan, they get cremated and their ashes get mixed with mud into these little clay pyramids that are called sasas. And these things are all over the country. And when I say all over, I mean these things are like everywhere. You go around a road bend and there'll be like 300 of them. You're walking in the city, they're all in the windowsills, doorsteps, like everywhere. So I want to learn about this, so I arrange a meeting with a guy whose name is Khenpo Puncho Tashi. So he is a Khenpo in the Buddhist faith. That's equivalent to about like a cardinal in the Catholic faith. And he wrote a book called The Fine Art of Living and Manifesting a Peaceful Death. So he lives here in this shack. It's up on this kind of cliff area. I have a driver. We go to drive up there and we hit this dirt road that's like this insane 4x4 road. And we're in a smart car. So I'm thinking like, all right, I gotta hike in like 10 miles to this freaking dude's cabin. God help me. But my driver was like, oh no, I got it. And he just, like we wrecked that car for sure. And then there's a trail that leads to this guy's house, so I hike in, and I get there, this woman takes me through this sort of cleansing ritual. She puts like some water on my head, makes me do the smoke in my face, and I go into this guy's house. Now the first room, there's nothing in it. It's like dirt floors. There's nothing in this room. The next one, it's a kitchen. It's basically a bucket system for water and a cooktop. There's a third room. It's got this big silk drape on it. All right, see what's behind door number 3 here. So I open this, start peeling back this drape, and I kind of look in, and there's this big altar, and it's got this big statue of the Buddha, and there's incense, and they're burning, and there's light coming in through this window, and it's catching this incense smoke. So I'm like scanning over, and I see this face through the smoke. And it's this guy. And he's sitting in the lotus position on this platform, full on like this. He's in the orange robes, bald head. He's got the prayer beads. And he just looks over at me like this, and he goes, welcome. I hear you want to talk about death. I'm like, oh, holy shit. Yeah, that's me, you know. So I go in there, this gangly, lanky, idiot American, to be quite honest, and sit down on this guy's floor, and we talk about death for like hours. And eventually he says to me, he goes, I want you to pretend that you are walking on a trail. And on this trail, in 500 yards, there's a cliff. And then he goes, the cliff is death. You're walking that trail right now. We are all walking that trail. And then he looks at me and he goes, don't you want to know there's a cliff? Because once you know there's a cliff, you might walk that trail differently. You might stop and take in the nature. You might smell a couple flowers along the way. You might have different conversations with the people that you are walking the trail with. So when you realize that the ride ends, you ride it differently. And that seems to improve people's lives. And this has been backed up by Western science. So researchers have found that thinking about death increases your happiness, reduces stress, and it increases compassion. Now, in every single one of those studies, the participants said, yeah, at first, that was hell. That was exceedingly stressful. But their behavior changed in a positive way afterwards that they got a long-term benefit. Okay, so now that I've thoroughly alarmed everyone at 3:30 on a Saturday afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do about some of these things. So after about a month, we hear the weed whacker in the distance, and plane comes in, lands, and I will tell you, when that plane landed, shotgun, like, get me out of there. I'd had enough time in the middle of nowhere, being uncomfortable. So then I find myself at airports again. Yeah, I'm flying little plane to little plane, finally make it back to Vegas. And when I get back to Las Vegas, everyone asks me the same question. Like, how did it change you, Michael? And I can answer that with something that happened in the airport in 2018. So this is a real thing. There's these 2 scientists, and they're psychologists at Harvard. And they're in line for TSA. They're going to a conference. And they're watching TSA do their job. And they notice that TSA is really good at finding problems. You've probably noticed this, right? You might have like a banana in your bag or something, and they like rip that thing apart. They're like, oh, we thought it was a Beretta. Or there's like some old lady in a wheelchair who's getting the full body pat down, like she can't even see. Now, obviously, better safe than sorry. But at the same time, these two psychologists, they wonder, if all of a sudden everyone followed the rules, the scanners never picked anything up, the beepers never beeped, would TSA just let people fly through? Would it be, enjoy your flight, please enjoy your flight? Now, they didn't think so. They thought that what they would do is just sort of widen what they considered a problem, because the job of TSA is to find problems. And these two, they wonder, I wonder if that's like a thing among humans, because they can see it in themselves. They're like, well, I actually tend to find a lot of problems in my life too. Maybe that's a thing. So they decide they're going to study this. And the way they study this is they get a big group of people. They do 2 different studies. In the first study, these people had to look at 800 different faces in a row, face after face after face, and they had to deem whether these faces were threatening or whether they were non-threatening. So these people would go, non-threatening, 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 ooh, threatening, non-threatening, one after the other, 800 times. Now, what the scientists didn't tell the people taking the study is that on the 200th face, they start giving them fewer and fewer threatening faces. The second study was very similar, except they had people read research proposals and deem whether the research proposals were ethical or unethical. So this should be rather black or white, right? It's like you look at a face, and you either find that person threatening or not. You read a research proposal, and it's either ethical or it's not ethical, because you've got this moral line in the sand, right? What they found is that humans don't see black or white. We see gray. And the shade of gray that we see, it depends on all the other shades that came before it. So as people started seeing fewer threatening faces, they didn't actually say threatening any fewer times. They started deeming faces that were sort of on the border as threatening, faces that might have been neutral before as threatening. Same with the research proposals. When they started feeding them fewer and fewer unethical research proposals, they didn't deem any fewer of them were unethical. They started getting really nitpicky, right? You're like, well, that thing, I don't like that thing. Throw it in the unethical pile. So they call this prevalence-induced concept change. What this basically tells us is that as humans experience fewer and fewer problems, we don't actually become more satisfied. We just lower our definition of what we consider a problem. So this is the science of first world problems. And you see this in polls. So I think we can all agree that compared to, say, 500 years ago, the world is much better. You're less likely to be starving. You're less likely to die at any given moment. You're more likely to know how to read. But when you poll people, the average American, only 12% of average Americans say that the world is improving. It's because we're always moving the dial. We're always moving the goalpost. So what do we do about this? I call it being a 2%er. So a study that really changed my mind about human behavior and what we're wired to do, it found that only 2% of people take the stairs when there is an escalator available. We're geared to do the next easiest thing, to always search for problems and compare them to whatever minimized problem we have now. And this drives us crazy, and it makes us unhealthy. 100% of those people knew that taking the stairs would improve their life. Yet only 2% were like, all right, I'm going to take the stairs. It is literally those little decisions to do the thing that is uncomfortable in the short term, but comes with a long-term benefit. That is how you improve in the context of today. Repeat it over time. And I also believe that sometimes, once a year, you also have to burn the ships. You got to do something like a misogi. You're doing a little every day, and then once a year, one day, you do a lot. So maybe for some of you, that will be this competition we're having right now. Small steps, then a big step. Throw yourself into the fire. One of my favorite This is my favorite quote of all time. This is also from Joseph Campbell after he basically analyzed thousands of years of mythology. What is the human story of becoming a good and useful human who contributes to others? It comes down to being willing to do challenging things and to throw yourself into the fire. He said, we have not to risk the adventure alone, for all the heroes of all time have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path. And where we had thought to find abomination, we shall find a god. Where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. Where we had thought to be alone, we shall be all with the world. So you don't take on these challenges and do hard things and do these crazy exercise routines so you can just be better in a vacuum. You're doing it because it gives you perspective and reframes your life and perspective and allows you to be a better human to others. So I'll give you a good example in closing, because I'm minus 128 right now, so you better shut it down real quick. When I flew from Las Vegas up to Alaska, I get in the 747, and I hate flying. Hate everything about flying. The seats are cramped, the plane's too hot, there's screaming babies. The movies they show you are terrible. Bathrooms cramped. It's the worst thing that could happen to anyone. And then I go spend a month in the Arctic. So if I want water, I gotta hike down to a stream, carry it back up, and it's heavy, it's cold. I'm freezing the entire time. I'm starving the entire time because you just can't pack in enough food. If I want to go to the bathroom, I gotta hike out on the tundra, and I gotta bring the rifle, by the way, because there's grizzly bears everywhere. So what do you think my flight was like when I went from Alaska back to Las Vegas? It was heaven. I hadn't been warm in a month. I was starving. It's like, yeah, can I have like 75 bags of those little pretzels, please? The movies, I've been reading Cliff Bar labels. I'm watching Fast and the Furious 79. Oh my God, this is so amazing. Screaming baby, hand me the baby, I got it. But what was most amazing is I get up, go to the bathroom, and afterwards I wash my hands. When I hit that faucet, warm running water hits my hands inside a tube of steel that is hurtling 30,000 feet above sea level at 600 miles an hour. Warm running water. When that warm water hit my hands, I broke out into an idiotic grin. The point I'm trying to make is that we live in the absolute freaking best time ever, ever, ever. And it's very easy to forget that. Never once in my life had I thought of hot water until I was removed from it. So that's why we do these things, because they can be great teachers, and they can allow you to appreciate just how amazing it is right now, and be present, and be aware, and ride this ride called life to the best of your ability, and pay attention. That's all I got. Thank you.